June 1960. The funeral of Norodom Suramarit, the King of Cambodia. Southeast Asia is in the eye of the gathering storm of the Cold War. The United States is about to elect a new president, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, who will adopt an uncompromising position in the struggle to contain communist expansion. As a result, the beguiling countryside of the lands the French called Indochine will soon be scarred by another 15 years of turmoil and destruction, to add to the decades of misery it has already suffered. Sadly, what is about to begin will be a trauma far greater than before. Using newly discovered color film and the first-hand accounts of the people of Indochina, this is their story. The Democratic Republic of Vietnam, autumn 1959. An East German propaganda film showing North Vietnamese soldiers in training. The leader of the North's armed forces, General Giap, is building a revolutionary army.
Our military art is to defeat material force with moral force. Defeat what is strong with what is weak. Defeat what is modern with what is primitive. And defeat the modern armies of imperialism with the people's patriotism and determination to carry out a revolution.
Chulun, the Chinese district of Saigon, the Republic of Vietnam, 1962. Ngo Dinh Diem, President of the Republic, has imposed his will on the South. The criminal gangs that ran Chulun have been eliminated, and religious opposition, especially from the Buddhists, has been suppressed. But the harshness of Diem's regime and escalating attacks from opponents in the countryside is making him increasingly unpopular. Resistance in the rural areas is supported by the communist government in the north. They form themselves into the People's Liberation Armed Forces, which become known in Vietnamese as Viet Nam Cong San, Vietnamese Communist, abbreviated to Viet Cong. The new US president John F. Kennedy sends an increasing number of advisors to support the Diem government. Special Forces soldiers who helped train the ARVN in counterinsurgency. Nguyen Hu Tien, a veteran of the victory against the French at Dien Bien Phu.
During the French War, we had very little, never enough weapons. We had guns made by the local people, very primitive guns, and we had bamboo. But still, we defeated the French. In that fight, we blew the buffalo horn, a terrible sound. Traditionally in Vietnam, when bandits came, we blew the buffalo horn. We used it at Dien Bien Phu. We blew the horn and the French rang up the white flag of surrender. When the Americans came, we believed we would defeat them too.
Saigon, March 1965. Full-scale war grips the nation. 3,500 US Marines land at China Beach to defend the airbase at Da Nang. They join 23,000 military advisors already in the country. President Diem has been assassinated in a military coup, and South Vietnam is being governed by the military. US President Kennedy has also been assassinated, and his successor, Lyndon Johnson, is facing a crisis that will come to define his presidency. The Viet Cong have attacked US bases. The bombing of North Vietnam has begun, and there has been rioting in Saigon. Lê Lu Brown, a censor in South Vietnam's Ministry of Information.
After the coup against Diem, the generals competed with one another, and there was one coup after another. The generals were even more corrupt than Diem. They gave me no hope. I was also skeptical about the American build-up. If the French, who colonized our country for over a century, could not win our support, how could the Americans, with their different language and culture, defeat the communists? We returned to the situation in the 50s, where the government controlled the cities and the Viet Cong the countryside. Even in Saigon, corruption and police harassment made people distrust the government and sympathize with the Viet Cong. But I didn't think the Viet Cong would win. I just thought the war would go on forever.
The viciousness of the fighting escalates. Ngo Vinh Long travels throughout the South making maps for the government.
Wherever we went, people were suspicious. Some of them said, if they are making maps, they are preparing for war. I said, maybe, But if they have good maps, then they are not going to bomb innocent civilians. The government held many executions. They make no bones about it, and even advertised it. They cut off the heads of people they thought were communists. They put their heads on stakes, sometimes with cigarettes pushed up their nostrils. It was a really savage time. Like something from the Middle Ages.
Just as in the First Indochina War, Vietnamese civilians bear the brunt of the conflict. A platoon leader in a scout company, 51st Regiment, the South Vietnamese Army, Phan Xuan Sinh.
I was flying over an area occupied by the Viet Cong. I saw a small house. I asked the American pilot to land a helicopter and find an old man and a woman living there. I explained that it was too dangerous to live there and that they had to move. We packed their belongings to move them to a refugee camp. Before taking off, we burned down their house to make sure they wouldn't come back. A few weeks later, I was amazed to see a new small house in the very same spot. Again, we flew down and found the same old couple living there. I said, "Uncle, I told you before, this place was too dangerous to live in. Why on earth would you come back?" He said, "All my ancestors are buried here. This is our land. We are not going to leave."
Little mercy is shown by either side to anyone who is captured. Soldiers from countries allied to the US anti-communist crusade also send troops to South Vietnam. Thailand, New Zealand, Australia, and South Korea. In each case, the involvement of its soldiers becomes a source of controversy at home. The Vietnamese are particularly fearful of the Korean soldiers. Le Van Gi, Dien Dung village.
The Korean Green Dragon Brigade was between here and the airport. I was in command of the Viet Cong. My wife was arrested many times, beaten, tortured, and spent 6 years in prison. The Americans and Koreans killed 34 people in one hamlet, 40 people in another, 7 people here. They raped the women, put them in houses, and set fire to them.
Ngo Ti Dao, a villager from Ti Tang, 7 miles from Hue.
The Americans controlled the village in the day. At night, the liberation forces were in control. I lost one eye in the fighting and also my left arm. The Americans and Korean soldiers, and sometimes the South Vietnamese, raped the women, then cut their breasts off and killed them.
Huyn Duc Ai, Zen Nok village.
In Cam Ha, when the Americans first came, all the Vietnamese were labeled Viet Cong. The Koreans shot them all and tore the children apart by their legs. There is only one survivor from that massacre.
March 29th, 1965, Saigon. A car bomb explodes outside the US Embassy. One of the dozens of wounded is US Deputy Ambassador Hugh Alexis Johnson. Many are killed. Among the dead, 2 Americans. An eyewitness account.
I was just a few yards away. Luckily, I wasn't hit by anything. It was a terrible sight. Bodies everywhere. Now we know what it's like in the war zones.
Nguyen Phat Le, an officer in the North Vietnamese army.
You cannot fight well without hatred. We had a different view about killing. We killed the enemy to regain independence for our country and to save our people. We did not feel guilty. Therefore, we had no nightmares. Not like the Americans.
The escalation of the war has brought the first US casualties. They are the first of many. By the summer of 1965, South Vietnamese helicopter and fighter pilots are waging war from the air on their own people. US President Lyndon Johnson had authorized the sustained bombing of North Vietnam in February 1965. Operation Rolling Thunder. Ngo Yen T. Kim Thuy, a youth volunteer in Chuan Sun.
We could distinguish every kind of bomb by its sound. A cluster bomb lands with a thud. That's because it's a mother bomb. It opens and out fly the baby bombs. They are lethal. One day, my commander asked me to go and check on a group of girls nearby. As I walked over, I saw a bomb drop straight into their shelter. Everyone stopped working and rushed over, screaming and crying. There were 5 girls in that shelter. 4 of them just turned to porridge. Only one was recognizable. She had her 2-year-old child with her. She was holding it so tightly. We couldn't separate them.
By August 1965, the death and destruction being inflicted on the North is mounting. Me, a 15-year-old girl, on the banks of the Red River, near Hanoi.
Our capital has suffered more than 200 bombing raids. Attacks come every day. Nobody knows when the next will be. But everyone is ready to defend our city.
Mother of 2 and chairman of her local party near Hanoi, Li Pham.
Our men are fighting in the south, so we have to do everything. Many have lost their lives in the bombings. Some are fighting with the men in the south. They are a long way from home, so we don't mind the sacrifice.
A 70-year-old villager from Lo, in the province of Hoa Binh. He is from the Thai minority in the northern mountains, where many tribes live.
I grew up in the feudal system. We were slaves and so poor. I still wonder today why we didn't die of hunger. The lord of the manor was carried to meetings on the backs of men to confirm his status. In the wars against the French, our village was razed to the ground with napalm. The French had done nothing for us, no schools or hospitals, just brothels and prisons. Then the Americans came.
Autumn 1968, Hanoi. The North Vietnamese war effort is in full swing. Despite widespread devastation and tens of thousands of deaths from US bombing, mass production has been moved out of the towns and cities, often located underground. Traditional production in the countryside still flourishes. More and more volunteers flow south along the Ho Chi Minh Trail through Laos and Cambodia to fight the war in the south. Phu Bung, an officer in the North Vietnamese army.
We had no direct communication with the South. A soldier would take a letter in his knapsack and carry it from Hanoi to Saigon on foot. Sometimes this will take more than a year. I received a letter from my wife after 2 years. But because it has been through rivers and rain, I couldn't read it. The words had gone. I could only kiss it. The war was like that. During Mao Tang, the Tet Offensive, we went to Cuchitano near Saigon, together with women and children. I will never forget the children who were bombed in the shelter and the cries of those we couldn't find.
The Tet Offensive had been launched at the end of January 1968, the Lunar New Year, Vietnam's most important holiday. It has become a turning point of the war. Losses on both sides have escalated. 40,000 South Vietnamese dead. 180,000 from the north. And nearly 14,000 Americans. There are now over 500,000 Americans in Vietnam. Nguyen Van Duyn, a translator.
The Viet Cong arrive on foot with a gun, some bullets and a shovel, a little rice, dried food, and a canteen of water. The Americans have water for showers brought in by helicopter. When we saw that, we knew they could never win the war. We knew we would win. We just didn't know when. Our grandfathers and fathers had defeated the French, and they had nothing. The Vietnamese fight well.
The full-scale attack on the US base at Khe Sanh, and the Tet Offensive's dramatic assault from tunnels and hiding places which struck most of the cities of the South, including Saigon and even the US Embassy, create a wave of disillusionment across the United States. Although the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese regulars suffer huge losses during the battles, and in the US retaliations that follow, the war is rapidly becoming unsustainable in the minds of more and more Americans. A leader of the Tet Offensive in Hue, Hoang Lang.
They burned houses, they stole, they beat people and killed them. They tortured women with electricity. They did many, many terrible things. But they didn't all want war in Vietnam. There were American soldiers who resisted and agreed with the anti-war demonstrations in their homeland. They didn't want to stay in Vietnam, and they didn't want to die in Vietnam. They wanted to go home.
Nguyen Trang Mai has escaped to the forest with her family to evade US bombing.
We were bombed nearly every day. There were so many planes. Our house was underground. When we heard the planes, we went down into the tunnels. School was held in the tunnels. Babies were born there. How could we live inside a tunnel for so long? Once, I saw a young girl leading a captured American pilot. She was very small. The pilot was very tall. She looked proud as they walked. The man kept his head down, but the girl looked proud. We have a poem about it. People would come to beat them, but the army wouldn't allow it. They said, this pilot will be punished by the authorities, not by you.
The punishment is severe. Solitary confinement, starvation diet, forced confessions, torture. Many will not survive captivity. A nurse in a hospital northwest of Hanoi, Huyen Phuong Dong.
In those days, everybody hated the Americans. There were a lot of civilian casualties, so naturally, we were full of anger. But Uncle Ho taught us to make a clear distinction between peace-loving Americans and warmongers. When the Americans started bombing, we moved our patients into the countryside. We did our operations underground, in bunkers built during the French War. We had to carry on, even in the midst of bombing strikes, and had orders not to abandon our patients. They were not to die alone.
September 1969, Hanoi. A grief-stricken nation mourns the death of its leader, Uncle Ho. Although he has not lived long enough to save a victory for the cause he has led for almost 40 years, Ho Chi Minh has seen the first withdrawals of US troops. 25,000 men ordered home in August by new US President Richard Nixon. In his will, Ho Chi Minh issues one last rallying cry.
The war of resistance may drag on. Our people may have to face new sacrifices of life and property. Whatever happens, we must remain firm in our resolve to fight the US aggressors until total victory.
Hanoi, 1972. Although secret negotiations are taking place in Paris between the United States and North Vietnam, war still rages. Cambodia and Laos are now heavily embroiled in the conflict. The bombing of the north has become more and more ferocious. December 1972. President Nixon orders more mining of Vietnamese harbors and the Christmas bombing campaign, a renewal of Operation Linebacker using B-52 bombers. Both sides come to accept that the price they are paying to prolong the war is too much to bear. The Paris negotiations soon resume, and the bombing ends. Within weeks, there is an agreement, and by the end of March 1973, the last US troops leave Vietnam. There is a ceasefire in Laos, and US bombing of Cambodia comes to an end in August. But Vietnam is still not at peace. South Vietnam fights on to prevent a communist takeover by the North. But the end is not long in coming. The outskirts of Saigon, April 30th, 1975. The city falls to the army of North Vietnam. 40 years of conflict are over. But there will be more suffering and hardship. A million people will leave Vietnam to escape the regime. There will be social upheaval and compulsory re-education programs in the South. There will be harsh reprisals against the Hmong people in Laos, and Cambodia will live through 5 years of genocide under Pol Pot. Only years later will peace return to Indochina. Nguyen Van Duyn in modern-day Saigon.
During the war with the French, during the war with America, there are always some who supported the invader. Many left, but many more stayed. We forgive them. We have hardship here. We have a difficult life. But this is our land. The Americans occupied this country, destroyed it, committed horrors here. But we try to shake hands today. We try to forgive America for what they did, so that we can rebuild our country and world peace.